Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast. Back with another Big Ten team preview here. We've got Niko Medved's Minnesota Golden Gophers, his first year coming over from Colorado State. Before we do dive in, if you are enjoying our content, please go ahead and like and subscribe. We do appreciate all your support out there. But looking at this roster turnover, brand new Minnesota roster, what strengths do you see on the offensive end of the floor?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main strength is just Niko Medved. As an offensive coach coming over from Colorado State, he always had great offenses over there. And in my Mountain West, and last year they really broke out in the second half of last year. Led by Nate Clifford, who was really one of the best players in the country. Ended up being a first round pick, but this is going to be a shooting efficiency based offense, and they were great every single year at Colorado State in this area. They were inside the top 40 in effective field goal percentage in all 7 years under Medved, which is really impressive. He just knows how to get guys open looks. It's predicated on off ball actions, whether that's running shooters off screens or there's a lot of back cuts within this offense. And overall, there's not a lot of pressure on primary creation, which I think is going to make for a pretty smooth transition for some of these players. And when there's a lack of on ball talent here compared to most teams in this league, and I think that makes for a rather smooth transition here in year one. Like you have guys like Bobby Durkin and Kate Tyson, who I think could be due for a bounce back year, and a guy in Isaac Ostema, who I see these three guys as real system fits, and I think they can just have success within this offense. Guy like Ostema is a pass first point guard that can play within an offense. Showed an ability to play within handoffs. I think he showed flashes of shooting as well, and I think he's an underrated guy who could potentially break out depending on what his role looks like. A guy like Bobby Durkin fits this offense perfectly as a movement shooter and a secondary creator. I think he's a pretty good passer. Obviously, the assist rate numbers aren't like going to wow you, but he played in a very similar offense at Davidson last year. A very off-ball action-oriented offense that didn't put a ton of pressure on primary action, and I think he fits right in here. And I mentioned a Tyson bounce back. He's a much better shooter than he showed at UNC. He obviously didn't get a ton of volume, but he shot it over like 42% in both years at Belmont. So there's no way he's a mid-20s three-point shooter. And then you have a front court that's fairly skilled and can operate as like handoff and post hubs and Rob Viola and Nehemiah Turner. I think these guys are like Turner had a 22% assist rate as a freshman at Central Arkansas, and he has real skill to fit within this offense. So I think Medved did a pretty good job of constructing a roster. And then if they need some advantage creation or downhill driving ability, they have two guys in Chancey Willis Jr. and Langston Reynolds. Unsure if they're like overall fit here because of the shooting, but this could be an element that Medved teams need, like late in the shot clock when you can just get into pick and roll and ask these guys to make a play off the bounce or get downhill. So overall, I think it's not going to wow you on the offensive end, but I do think Medved is going to gain some traction here in year one.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think it's a unit that's like it's solid, right? The primary guard creation for me, at least for guys that have proved it, right? Like Willis is really the one that stands out to me. The other, you mentioned Langston Reynolds, Isaac Asuma. I have like some question marks there, right? We've seen Willis 38% assist rate last year. He takes care of the ball. Even in like his top 100 games last year, 36% assist rate, still kept the turnover rate low. Obviously, the big issue with him is his ability to shoot the ball. He's primarily just a downhill guy, looking to get to the rim, which like he does a good job. Like just being relentless. He's a strong finisher at the rim. And he just does a good job getting offenses organized, in my opinion. I think he's going to do a good job with that in Niko Medved's first year here. My main concerns kind of came in the front court actually, and not so much with like their ability to create, kind of like you said. But I don't really think this team's going to be very good on the offensive glass. We saw you see Robert Viola. He was a 10% offensive rebound guy. Um, Outside of that, like I think it's like you said, it's going to be an offense that relies pretty heavily on like shooting efficiency, and I think that that's very true. I don't really think this team's going to be on the glass that much. I don't really know as if like they're going to play if they really have a bunch or have guys that can really go get you a bucket through the post, right? I think like you said, they can be like post hubs in a way, to generate offense for others, but I don't really see like any real interior scoring threat, which is really where I have some concerns with this offense. We'll see. Like you said, I think this unit will be solid. I think he did a solid job of bringing in some pieces, but overall, I think there are like some concerns with the overall unit.
Yeah, those are definitely fair points. And you know, Medved, I don't think Medved would ever go out and build a roster that was like ever going to be great on the offensive glass. Like the last 4 years, his teams have been outside the top. Actually, the last 5 years, his teams have been outside the top 260 in offensive rebound rate. They value other things like getting back in transition, which will create a high floor for this defense that we'll talk about in a minute. But my like I had some ball security concerns with this team. I'm not like super high on the ball handling talents. Like I think Willis is fine. I think handling pressure, it could get a little dicey. Guy like Asama as well is not like a super talented ball handler. He doesn't have the ball on a string by any means. And just across the board, I think there are some guys that could struggle with athleticism and struggle with pressure. And the fact that this is more of a shooting efficiency offense that, there's a lot of back cuts involved. Like the more often that you're passing the rock, the more often that you could run into a turnover in a half court setting. So I could see that as a small concern. And then one final thing would just be like the fit of Chancey Willis and Langston Reynolds. Like they obviously have other off ball shooting options to help these guys out, but their lack of shooting is, could muck up some things in a half court setting. Like you have a guy in Reynolds who was in the 96th percentile in field goal attempt percentage at the rim, and he took just 43s all season at Northern Colorado. Like it's a very weird skill set to be bringing over. It creates some concerns when it comes to if his rim scoring is going to be able to translate. Obviously, he's a wide framed guard that should have some success and should get to the line at a decent rate. But overall, I just have concerns of like, can he play in more of a secondary role? And then you have a guy in Chancey Willis who shot at 28% from three last year and was just in the 11th percentile in catch and shoot efficiency, which, this is an offense that's trying to generate catch and shoot opportunities. And obviously he's going to have the ball in his hands more often than not. But I do think the fit on the offensive end is a bit odd. And yeah, I think just overall, I think they have enough pieces to mask those two guys, and those guys can kind of coexist as creators, but just a small concern.
Yeah. Shifting gears now to the defensive side, one guy we didn't mention at all on the offensive side is Jalen Crocker Johnson, who I know you're a big fan of. This is kind of where I think he'll provide a lot of value as like a 6'8" guy who has a lot of versatility, switchability, impacts winning in a lot of ways on the defensive end. But alongside him, what strengths do you see in this Minnesota defense?
Yeah, this is where Crocker Johnson is going to, make his money as the glue guy on the defensive end. He's able to handle responsibility on the perimeter and in the post. Like there's a chance he can play some small ball five, and he can switch on to a lot of different guys on the perimeter, and good rebounder. He just does a lot of things well on the side, and it was really good for Medved to get him to transfer over to Minnesota. But I mean, I kind of like a lot of these pieces on this roster as a whole. I kind of like the perimeter group and Isaac Asama, who I think is a really good guard defender. Chancey Willis is a good playmaker. He's got length for being 6'2". I think he's listed at 6'2". He plays much bigger than that. Then a guy like Langston Reynolds that I mentioned is like a a wide framed 6'4" guard with some length as well. And a guy like Bobby Durkin can do some really nice things for this defense too. Great positional defender, and he's actually a pretty good off ball defender, good playmaker. Not the best on ball defender, a bit laterally limited, but overall he can do some nice things on the defensive end. And I mentioned it. The lack of offensive rebounding I think is partly because Medved emphasizes transition defense. They were in just the 10th percentile in transition frequency allowed last season at Colorado State, and another thing, there are some rim protection concerns, but Medved defenses do a nice job of denying the rim. They play like a sort of like shell like defense that it kind of reminds me of the Brad Brownell defense at Clemson. Like it's very similarly set up, denying transition and just like forcing teams to win over the top off the bounce. So I think analytically he does a pretty nice job, and this aspect is going to help them on the defensive glass as well. Led by the big man rotation of Turner and Viola. They're both over 20% there, and then you have some help from the wings as well. And Bobby Durkin, who was 18%, Reynolds was 17%, Willis 14%, and Crocker Johnson was 16.5%. So I think this is a really high floor unit. It's not a group that's going to absolutely get after you, but they're going to control what they can control, and they have some really good on-ball defenders to go with it.
Yeah. I think, like you mentioned, like the main thing with Niko Medved defenses is he does keep teams out of transition, does a good job of limiting like strong opportunities. For me, like I did make note of like a concern for me as the rim protection. I have concerns with like Viola as a rim protector. I think Turner is okay. Last year averaged 1.1 blocks in 18 minutes. But I think the unit as a whole will be able to, like you said, kind of navigate around it. I just, if it doesn't, I do have concerns with their ability to protect the rim. And then the other concern I have, and like you said, it's not a defense that's going to really get after you. So a weakness, I think, is turnover forcing with this unit. Like I worry about a guy like Bobby Durkin, who you said doesn't move the best laterally. They're not going to be able to get after you, I think, because there are some limitations in some of the skill sets of some of their guys, right? Niko Medved defenses typically finish around between like 150 and 200. At least that's how it's been the last 4 years in turnover rate defense at Colorado State. So not exactly a unit that's going to really get after you. And I expect more of the same here. I think it's kind of a weakness of this roster because they're going to have to, I think, play more conservative due to some like crutches in some areas. So I think it's just going to it's going to be a weakness just due to like how they scheme it out.
For sure. And I think Medved was like prepared for that. I think he built his front court rotation more around the offensive side, like particularly at the 5 position. I think they're going to be very valuable in taking some pressure off of the guards. So, and he does a good job of masking the rim protection. But yeah, my concerns were like you get a little bit overwhelmed, potentially overwhelmed by high end athleticism or, just great size inside. I think could give them some issues. And I think the depth pieces like on the wings are a bit lacking. Like I don't like Cade Tyson or like a BJ Omad as great defenders. Like if they get like significant run, I think the defense definitely gets a little bit worse. Just like I mentioned, getting overwhelmed by size and elite offenses. But besides that, I don't really have many like major red flags. I think I'm a little bit higher on this defense than most.
Yeah. Shifting to MVP and X factor for this team, where'd you go here?
I did go with Chancey Willis still for MVP, despite the concerns with fit on the offensive end. I do think he's going to be a guy that's going to have to operate on the ball a little bit more often, and I think he's a great two-way player as well. I think he can. Like I know they're not going to force turnovers at a high clip, but he's a guy that can kind of make something out of nothing on the defensive side with his his plus physical traits for only being 6'2". And I think his passing ability is going to play a big role for this offense as well. X factor, I went with Isaac Osima. I was between him and Jalen Crocker Johnson, but I think Awesome is like a breakout player on the offensive end, and that could make him a true two-way player for this team. More of a pass first guard, but he really showed flashes of perimeter scoring last year, and he's super poised. Like once he gets into the lane, and he can create rim attempts for himself as well. Just there's a lot of craft when he gets into the lane, has an ability to get to the free throw line. So I was pretty impressed from what I saw on tape, and I think he's a guy that could potentially not break out of nowhere because he did play a role for this team last year, but I think there's more scoring stuff in the tank as well.
Yeah, I almost went with him as my X factor. Ultimately, I did go with Jalen Crocker Johnson. I think just because he provides a lot of versatility value on both ends of the floor. Right, we didn't even like mention his offensive game, but he's a really solid shooter. He's serviceable like on the offensive glass. He does provide a little bit of value there as an 8% offensive rebound rate guy. Shot the three at 35.5%. So I think there is some value there. And then the defensive end kind of as that Swiss Army knife for them, being able to guard multiple positions and defensive rebound at 6'8", I think is really key for them. And then I also went with Chancey Willis Jr. as the MVP, just because I think he's going to have so much responsibility as kind of an on-ball creator. And I think he's going to be really good in that role. I think he showed the ability to really get downhill, finish strong at the rim, be able to finish in a lot of different ways. And I think he can create for others in this team that is dependent on shooting efficiency. I think he's a guy that can get guys shots. So ultimately, that's why I went there. Now, in terms of ceiling and floor of this team, where do you really see them finishing?
Yeah, I don't see a super high ceiling just because I think the talent compared to the rest of the league is a little bit lacking, but I did ultimately get them up to 11th in the league, and that could potentially get you into some bubble conversations, maybe even like a next four out kind of situation would be their ceiling. And I actually think they have a higher floor relative to what other people think. I think people would view their floor as being at the bottom of the league just because you look at the roster and the talent just doesn't really pop off the page. But I think Medved is enough of a floor raiser on both offense and defense to get them out of the cellar. I had them at 16th. I think they are a tier above Rutgers and Penn State. So ultimately, I went with 16th as their floor, and obviously no tournament when you're 16th in the league.
Yeah, I went 12th and 16th, so not to get too much into it, but just because it's just going to echo a lot of your thoughts. But I think they're a solid enough team to not finish at the bottom. I think, like you said, there are a couple teams that are worse off, and then I think 12th is within the realm of possibilities if shooting efficiency wins out and they play well enough on the defensive end to kind of avoid the rim protection being exposed. So yeah, I think they can get like right in that small window. But before we wrap things up, um, bold prediction for this team.
Yeah, mine's a little bit more of like a bold prediction for the future. I mean, it involves this season. It's I think Minnesota, like, they get out of the cellar of this league. They can get themselves to like the 13th or 14th best team in the league. Like, be competitive within this conference night in and night out. And I think Medved gains enough traction for next season, brings in some recruits, brings in some higher level guys that fit this offense well also. And I think this is a team that makes the tournament next season. I think they can get into the tournament as like a bubble team, maybe even an 8 or 9 seed. And he was able to do that year in and year out at Colorado State. I think he made the tournament like 4 times in 7 years, which is pretty impressive. I mean, he's obviously had great talent there, but I just think his ability to coach off is going to be an attractive place to play as well. So I think he gets to the tournament next season.
Yeah, I know you're a big Medved guy, so it's not surprising that that's your bold prediction. For me, I went with a Chancey Willis stat. I said he averages at least 6.5 assists a game, so a little bit of a jump from what he was last year, 5.8. I think there's enough shooting talent here, and he's going to have enough creation responsibility on his plate to get to that number.
That's fair. Yeah, and within this offense, I think it's typically a high assist rate offense. So if he has the ball in his hands, maybe a little bit more. I think, it's in the realm of possibility.
Yeah. So, all right, we'll wrap things up with Minnesota here. We'll see you next time on the Mainly Hoops podcast.